This is Lewis on Boxing Social in association with Empire Fights and Forged Irish Stout. No man I want to be better to be joined with after that than Dan Rafael. We've just seen, Anthony Joshua stop Otto Wallin and Joseph Park have a shutout win against Deontay Wilder, as well as many entertaining fights on the undercard. Firstly, as you look back on that whole card, instant reaction, very pleased with sort of how it all went together.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. I thought, there's always going to be certain fights that are, looks like a mismatch here or there. But I mean, for 8 fights in total, I started watching the show, when it started 11 o'clock in the morning, my time here in the East Coast of the United States, and, watched all the way through. And it was a fun show. I enjoyed it. There were some good knockouts, some good performances. Obviously the main event was a great performance from Joshua, an upset and, I guess a disappointment, not because I'm anti-Joe Parker or anything like that. I rather like Joe. Glad he got a great victory for himself. It of course, at least for the time being, ruined the prospect again of a Joshua versus Wilder fight. But you saw other tremendous performances, whether it was Ajit Kabayel with a knockout, kind of an upset, a great one punch knockout from Jai Opetaia, who remains the lineal cruiserweight champion, even if the IBF decided that it was a fight that they wouldn't sanction for reasons that are absurd. But all in all, in my mind, here in the United States, the fight was the card was $39.99 on pay-per-view, and compared to the typical $70 to $85 pay-per-views that we typically is how they're typically priced, this was a great value. I felt like I got value for my money. I was happy with it.
Absolutely, definitely. We'll jump straight into it. I suppose the first talking point would be Deontay Wilder losing to Joseph Parker. As I said, a shutout win for Joseph Parker. I think you sort of could give him every single round there. If not Deontay, maybe edging one. What did you make of that whole fight?
I gave Joe Parker all 12 rounds. I didn't think any of the rounds were all that close. There was a couple of rounds in there where Joseph Parker had Deontay Wilder reeling a little bit, backed into the ropes. He hurt him a few times. Had a couple of very obvious and big rounds. And the biggest problem with Deontay Wilder, I've covered Deontay's entire career. We all know what's going on. He's looking for the right hand. But at some point, when you can't find the right hand, you have to be having the ability to do other things. He didn't use his jab. He's never really been a guy that used his hook too much. And he just never had he just never had the idea to go and try something different. There was really no urgency in his corner, it didn't seem like to me. And, he's rescued fights before with the hook, with the right hand. Luis Ortiz, too, for example. I was at that fight. He lost every round, and then he landed the bomb. And that's sort of what Deontay has become in recent years. But it's not going to always work. And Parker was in great shape. Parker was sharp because he's been active. This was, his 4th fight of the year. Even if he wasn't fighting top-level opponents in those other 3 fights, he was getting in the ring and doing the training camps. And I've always had massive respect for Andy Lee, who I covered as from day one of his professional career through his retirement, and now he's becoming one of the top trainers in boxing, following in the footsteps of my long dear departed friend and his great mentor, the great Emmanuel Stewart. And they got a good team over there. And obviously Tyson Fury was in that camp helping Joe out, as he talked about after the fight. So the upset didn't shock me, but what shocked me was that just how befuddled and just completely with no ability to do anything was how Deontay fought. It just was a real shock. I don't know if it's the layoff. I don't know if he's 38 now. If he's his Hellenius fight notwithstanding, he's had two very brutal, hard, rough, tough knockout losses to Fury. At 38. You're not a young man anymore, and he's had some hard fights.
One thing I did want to touch on there was the game plan and the corner work from Malik Scott and Deontay Wilder, as it seemed a shout for Joseph Parker, and it really seemed that there was no urgency to sort of try anything different for Deontay Wilder. We know that the game plan is always to find the right hand, but just intrigued to what you thought of the work in the corner and the game plan coming out from Deontay Wilder, where, as I said, there wasn't really much plan B.
Yeah, I don't know what the game plan was. I don't know if there's anything other than let's find a right hand, because he didn't jab very well, like I mentioned. He doesn't use his hook, and there wasn't a lot of urgency. It's one thing. When you're with Deontay Wilder and he's losing round after round after round, and you're through say 4 or 5 rounds, you're still at that point. I don't even think you're that worried. Now you get into like 7, 8, 9. You're like, okay, now you got to start to worry a little bit because Parker has banked a million rounds, and it will get to a point. Now Joe didn't do this, but there are fighters that can find a way to keep away for the last few rounds and not really do anything and not engage and not put themselves in any harm's way. And I thought that when the 12th round came around and he's sitting on the stool getting ready to go out for the final round, and you got Malik there, and he's telling him instructions, go, you got to do this, you got to do that, but there was no like, we need when I mean, look, JD's, who's now was the longtime head trainer, now is like the assistant or the co-trainer, however you want to describe him. He's been around Deontay his entire career.
Yeah.
Malik has been around him for many years. Malik is a former professional fighter. Like, they know that he's losing the fight.
Yeah.
When you're in the 12th round and you got the gigantic fight with Joshua on the table, signed, by the way, you got to tell your man, you need a knockout. You can't mess around and say it in code. You got to tell him the real deal, and they didn't do that.
Yeah. And as we said there about Wilder and what could be next for him, do you feel like this could be the last time we saw Deontay Wilder in the ring, with that performance being sort of a shadow of the ones that we saw pre Tyson Fury?
I mean, you never know. And he sort of, when asked that sort of question in the ring afterwards, talked about I'll be back. But then when asked about if he still had the fire to do it, he says, if this is the last time, I had a great, I forget how he said it, but he's happy with his life. Obviously he's made a tremendous amount of money. He was, held a heavyweight title for 5 years. He made 10 title defenses, which is a lot of title defenses, more than most people that win heavyweight championships. He has nothing to be ashamed of. He gave us some huge fights and some great entertainment and some massive knockouts. And if this is it for him at his age, and there's nothing else that mountain he wants to still try to climb, and he wants to retire, good for him. I applaud, because I'd rather see him get out now, with his faculties intact and a big fat bank account, than hang on and become a stepping stone for somebody. That's going to be up for him and his family to decide over the next, I guess, few months. I'd be a little surprised if he didn't fight again. But you just never know what's going to happen when these guys finish up and they have a chance to really reflect and think. And in the ring, a couple of minutes after that is not really the time to make a full assessment.
Definitely, absolutely. And before we touch on Anthony Joshua, when we knew after, if he beat Parker, we knew the logical step could be the Anthony Joshua fight. Yourself, you reported on the 2-fight deal being signed. Eddie Hearn denied that and said that that wasn't true. So now what sort of happens now that got sort of the script has been sort of thrown in the fire?
Well, what I reported was that the deal was agreed to pending them not losing, and that the contracts were with both camps, and they were expected to be signed prior to them entering the ring on Saturday. And Eddie went on his social media and told various outlets, didn't have the balls to call me and tell me, or text me, or contact me in some way. It's not like he doesn't know how to get a hold of me. I've got Eddie's number, he's got mine, no big deal there. But basically said that it wasn't done, and that I, and the inference was I'm lying, or that I have misreported what was accurate. He stood in the ring with Chris Mannix in the post-fight interview on DAZN's pay-per-view and said, yes, we had signed for the fight. So I stand by my reporting 1,000%, that it was accurate, that my source was accurate, and that they had not only agreed to the fight, but they had actually signed the contracts for that fight. Now that won't happen, at least not next. I mean, you never say never that it could never happen in the future. Obviously, the days grow shorter as the years go on of when these guys would be able to do the fight and when the public would still be interested in the fight. But with the loss, we'll see what Deontay decides to do. And so you want to know what's Joshua going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the reasons why this fight, a lot of people question, why is Anthony Joshua fighting Otto Wallin? And the talking point was, and I sort of understood this and sort of believed in it to some degree, that Anthony Joshua, at his level of fame and fortune, can pick anybody and a top heavyweight contender to fight, and they'll make a deal with no problem, it seems to me, except for the problems there have been making a Wilder fight or making a Fury fight. But those are the guys that are on sort of similar equal levels as he. And Otto Wallin and lots of other guys are in the same kind of boat. He could have picked anybody, but they're like, well, why is he fighting him? Because he's a lefty, he's a southpaw, and he's had troubles with lefties. Just look at the Usyk fights. The reason was because back a few months ago in Otto's previous match, he defeated Ryan Garcia. That was an IBF elimination fight for the number 2 position. And Anthony's already highly ranked in the IBF. Number 1, of course, is Hill Hrgovic, who was already the mandatory, who won on tonight's undercard. And the idea was, yes, the Wilder fight was not 100% made at that time when this was all being discussed, when the show was being put together. And so I know Joshua wants to fight for another title. It's a piece of legacy. It gives you leverage for making other fights and for money and things along those lines. And so the plan was, I think, I'll fight Otto because when I beat him, I will take over that next highest spot in the IBF rankings. And when Tyson Fury has his fight with Alexander Usyk, and when that fight is over, everybody knows they have a 2-fight deal. The IBF has already mandated that they have to either fight Hrgovic or be stripped. So what's going to happen? They're going to be stripped of the title or vacate the title of the IBF. So after their first fight, that will become vacant. Hrgovic will be the guy to fight the next available contender. And now who will be that next available contender? It will be Anthony Joshua. So it's not by no means a done deal, and other things may materialize or come to pass. I mean, who knows? Maybe Anthony Joshua fights Francis Ngannou or something crazy like that. But in his back pocket, if he wants it, there's a very strong possibility that we will see Anthony Joshua against Filip Hrgovic for the vacant IBF heavyweight title.
You just mentioned Ngannou there. Before we touch on the Joshua performance against Wallin, he tweeted about he's licking his lips, seeing the talent tonight and what was on store. Do you feel like we could potentially see him back in the heavyweight mix against sort of potentially someone like an AJ or Joseph Parker or a top 10 heavyweight?
Absolutely, why not? I mean, he made a big impression with his performance against Tyson Fury. Based on that and other factors, the WBC went to their convention, and when they do all their various rankings and mandatories in the organizations, or rather in the weight classes, he was, put into the top, I think number 10 in the heavyweight division, which makes him eligible to fight for a title. I mean, you can't tell me that people wouldn't be intrigued to see Francis Ngannou against Anthony Joshua, after having seen how he handled himself with Tyson Fury. I mean, I think most people would acknowledge, and this is not in any way a disrespect to Joshua, but Fury is a more complicated fighter. I think that's fair to say. He's taller, he's longer, he's heavier, he's a little quicker probably. He also has deceptive power, a lot of things that make him different than a Joshua, who is, when I say this, I don't mean it badly. He's basic, but he's really good at basic, but you can go to school on that. It's a jab, it's a right hand. It's not anything different, but Fury is a different ballgame. So my point here is this: if he was able to do what he did with Fury, he probably thinks that I can have similar or better success against a fighter that's not going to throw me as many wrinkles as a Tyson Fury is capable of doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll just touch on the AJ performance now. I think post Usyk, many would agree that that's probably his most destructive and convincing display. What did you make of the performance from AJ out there, stopping Otto Wallin in 5 rounds?
Listen, I thought he looked terrific. I mean, I thought that was, if you're an AJ fan, if you're in the AJ camp and you want to see him go on to do bigger and better things, in the future, I think you have to be very, very pleased and very excited and super happy with that performance. There was nothing in there that I saw that he didn't do or that he did wrong or put himself in kind of in a bad spot or got touched up or anything like that. He went in there and he mowed down. Again, I don't want to make Otto Wallin sound like, he's the next coming of Muhammad Ali or anything like that, but he's a good quality, solid heavyweight in today's era. He may not be, if you were making your top 10, I'm not sure he necessarily inches into the top 10, but he's probably like in the top dozen, 13, 14, but he's a solid guy. He gave Tyson Fury probably the toughest fight of his career other than Deontay Wilder in their first and third fights. He's a solid heavyweight, and he's familiar with Joshua because they had fought as amateurs. They had sparred together. And he's also been busy. He's won 6 fights in a row, or had won 6 fights in a row since he was defeated by Fury in that very competitive fight. So he had every reason to be confident. And if you didn't know all that history that I just outlined, Joshua went in there and just blew him away. Basically, it was never in the fight. I mean, he busted open his nose, had the looked like his nose was broken, had a cut on his nose. Had his face was marked up. He was getting tagged with right hands. And there was never really anything of real serious danger coming back. It didn't seem like, and Otto's really not the biggest puncher to begin with, based on what you see from other heavyweights. And so, I thought that was a superb performance from Joshua. It was good for him to have the 3 fights this year. He was freed from mandatories and from the bullshit that goes on with the sanctioning bodies. He was just able to focus on what he was doing. Some people question, he's changing trainers again because he was working with Ben Davison for this fight instead of, because it kind of came on short notice. So rather than pack up and go back to Texas, for a few weeks with Derrick James, he opted to stay in the UK, where he had worked informally, I guess, for a little while, just as a, being in the gym to stay in shape with Ben, and decided to go from there. And, he did a great job, Joshua, in the fight. And I'm sure, he had to be pleased with what Ben brought to the table, and we'll see what happens in the future. It's going to be interesting to me. Does he decide to stay with Ben, or does he decide to go back to Derrick, who by all accounts, there's still a good relationship? It wasn't like he fired him. This was more of like a logistical thing than a training thing. But all I know is that Anthony Joshua looked good. And anytime you have a big superstar heavyweight like that, who comes off a big win, it's good for obviously him, but as a business, as a sport, for fans, just for the whole division and all that, it's a great thing. And it would have been obviously better had Wilder won, but how can you not be happy? Joseph Parker's, a nice guy also. How could you not be happy to see him get a career best victory? I mean, he's right when he was asked. I think this was, he won the title, the WBO title, against Andy Ruiz. And so obviously you win a world title. That's a big deal. But in terms of, you look at down the roster of the fights he's had in his career, this was not for a title, but this will go down as his biggest win without question.
I did just want to touch on the trainer situation there. Obviously, since leaving Robert McCracken, he's had Robert Garcia, Derrick James, and Ben Davison. This being his most dominant display so far, do you feel like did you feel like that could prove anything? You talked about there him sort of since Derrick James, he's had the Franklin fight and the Hellenius fight, were both sort of a bit subpar performances. His best performance has been with Ben Davison. Do you feel like that could prove anything?
I think there's two ways to look at it. On the one hand, some people might give Ben a lot of credit and say he should stick with Ben because of how he looked in the fight against Otto in this just most recent bout. But I think there's also a school of thought that could say it took time to get your confidence back, to go to school on some things after you lost 2 fights in a row, and that Derrick was able to kind of put him back together to a degree. And this was the payoff. And I mean, I know that the Brits aren't necessarily into like American baseball. I don't think. I was thinking it's sort of like you're the starting pitcher, you pitch deep into the fight, you do a really good job, and then the guy comes in at the end and gets the save. That Derrick was the starter and Ben was the closer. And in baseball, you need both to have a successful championship season. You got your starting pitcher, you got your closer. And I kind of thought about it in that respect, that they both deserve credit, because the things that Joshua did in today's fight, I'm sure, are certain things. And he talked about this in the buildup when he did interviews and talked to a lot of the media guys, was that he's not just like forgetting the things that he's learned over the last, year or so working with Derrick. He's taking things that he worked on and that he spent countless hours in that hot gym in Texas and brought it into the remainder of the camp he did with Ben and into the fight against Otto, as he, stayed sharp and, had a third fight this year. So I think they both get credit. So like I said, I'd be interested to see what Anthony's perspective is and what he decides to do. He's going to get stick, as they say, probably either way. Because on the one hand, if he doesn't go back to Derrick, it's like, you're ditching a guy that kind of rebuilt you for after your, rough losses. And if he ditches Ben, you're like, what are you doing? You just ditched a guy that, was the guy in your corner for what was a really superb performance and a very solid victory. So it's a good problem to have, I guess. I mean, I don't think you can go wrong either way. Ben and Derrick are both outstanding trainers and have been for a number of years. So, good luck to them figuring that out.
And just as we move on to look at potentially what's next for AJ, I know we talked about the IBF route, and I know Tyson Fury has got his hands full on February 17th, not just once, but twice with Alexander Usyk. But that fight is always going to be there, and it's fight that's something that's always going to entertain the fans. We don't know how this fight with Usyk will go, but do you feel like the gap where sort of you talked about this fight this time last year, people would probably say, Fury would beat him. Fury coming off a subpar performance against Ngannou. When you look at that fight now as a marketing and potentially sort of as a competitiveness, do you feel like the gap is sort of closing down a little bit when it comes to Fury and Joshua?
Because you're as good as your last fight. I mean, that's just that's not just in boxing. That's in I think life. Your last, if you're comparing to whatever else is going on in your life, your last endeavor in that situation is going to be compared to the next one. And so, I mean, it's not unreasonable to say, okay, Fury, looked obviously not too good when he had the fight with Ngannou, and he was a guy making his professional boxing debut, however decorated and outstanding he was as a mixed martial arts fighter. And Otto Wallin is certainly a more accomplished boxer than Ngannou is. And Joshua looked really good against him. But, every fight is different. They still have differing styles, and the matchup would be different. I tend to think that a Tyson Fury would take a Joshua much more seriously than he was taking Ngannou. I'm not saying he didn't take Ngannou seriously at all, but I don't think he trained a lot in terms of seriousness for that fight. You could tell by his conditioning, just the way he looked, that's just, I guess that's human nature. I think he would know that there's going to be more at stake against a Joshua because they are the two top British heavyweights of the time, two top heavyweights in the world, frankly, of the era, really. And so, yeah, if he's going to take that more serious, so I think he'd be more ready for that. And Joshua, is going to take that fight seriously. Who knows if that's going to happen? But, unfortunately, it's going to be, if it never does happen, like you just said, it's probably at least a year off because Fury is going to be tied up with Alexander Usyk for the next couple of fights. And they're probably not going to fight more than twice next year. So I'm not even thinking about that. Let them go do their thing. The Wilder fight is, I don't say it's never going to happen, but it won't be next, I wouldn't think. And so Joshua will go on a different path, whether it's, again, I was sort of just joking about the Ngannou fight, but I guess it's conceivable.
It's possible, yeah.
But then you have the real possibility of Hrgovic for the vacant IBF title and any other heavyweight. Look, here's what it also comes down to. If the Saudis, who are bankrolling all these big events, the General Entertainment Authority and Turki Al-Ashiki, who runs that and decides how to spend the money, they can buy any fight that they want.
Yeah.
So if they say to Joshua and Eddie Hearn, we'd like to see Joshua against Hrgovic, who we've now had on this card, and they have a deal with him for other fights, they pay tremendous amounts of money. That'll be the fight. If they say, we'd like to see Joshua versus you, maybe they'll make that fight. I mean, they can buy any fight they want. They have the money and they're not afraid to spend it. So I think a lot of it's going to come down to what is their appetite for whatever fight they want.
Absolutely, definitely. Just wanted to list off sort of a couple more from the card. We did see Daniel Dubois stop Jarrell Miller in a brave comeback for Dubois after the Usyk fight. Sort of what was your thoughts on that fight as it came in?
Well, number one, that was a good, entertaining fight. That was a big part of why the pay-per-view turned out to be good, because it was a fun fight to watch. It was, highly entertaining. And I have to be honest, I was impressed by Dubois because I thought that eventually he was going to get run over by Jarrell Miller. Not because I think Jarrell Miller is some great heavyweight, and I'm not really that big of a fan of his. I just looked at the styles, the way that Daniel has conducted himself in certain fights. He did quit against Usyk. I'm not saying that like to use the word quit as a negative. I'm just using it as a fact. He went down on a jab and stayed on his knee while he was looking at the referee. In the context of professional boxing at the highest level, that's typically not what happens. So he even said himself after the fight, I had to prove to myself I was a real fighter, that I could overcome adversity. I'm paraphrasing. And I did that, and I'm proud of myself. And you know what? He has every right to be proud of himself. He did a hell of a job against a tough customer. I know Jarrell maybe wasn't in hadn't been in the ring too much over the last few years for obvious reasons with his constant failing of drug tests. And he wasn't in the greatest shape, of course, tonight, but he came to fight. He showed, pretty good stamina, good shin, threw a lot of punches also. And Daniel overcame some hard moments. He got tagged a few times in that fight. So, and he was outweighed by like literally almost 100 pounds. So all that together, Daniel Dubois should be happy with himself. He should celebrate this victory. But he also should not let it go to his head, because Jarrell Miller is not Philip Hrgovic. He's not Anthony Joshua. He's not even Deontay Wilder. He's not a top elite heavyweight. But he puts himself in a great position because he won an exciting fight. I'm sure he proved to a lot of people that were down on him or negative about the way that the fight against Usyk ended and all the carrying on about the fake low blow, or the fake that it was a real low blow, but that was a fake legal punch, I should say. And so he's in line to fight pretty much anybody. There's no protecting Daniel Dubois. Find the biggest, best fight. I'd like to see Zhang Zhilei get involved in some of these fights also. He's got the interim title of the WBO. He was like the one sort of top name that never really was discussed or came up much on with this show. But I'm sure he'll be back in the mix with some of these guys. Frank Warren still has future fights with him, so he'll get himself in the mix. Maybe he's a guy that they try to match up with Dubois or something like that. That's a fight Frank can make pretty easily for that WBO interim title. Who knows?
Absolutely. And just another one from me. Dmitry Bivol boxing against Lyndon Arthur to quite a comfortable decision. What did you sort of make of that performance? Another sort of decision from Bivol.
I think it was more than comfortable. He won every single round. It was 120 to 107 on all three scorecards, and that was the right score because Lyndon Arthur has a good heart, and he tried, and he did the best he could, as he said, and he just lost all the rounds. I mean, it's as I was saying when the fight was made, and then a lot of the conversation in the preview is that Lyndon Arthur is a good light heavyweight. Dmitry Bivol has got Hall of Fame level ability. He's a pound for pound fighter. He's one of the best boxers in the entire world. and he's a tough opponent to defeat. Whoever is in the weight class, and so he went in, did what he could, and I think Bivol would have maybe liked to get the knockout. He almost had him there in the 11th round. He dropped him. He was very, very close to getting a stoppage in round 12. The referee was like literally, I felt like about a split second away from stopping the fight, and Lyndon was able to just drop an uppercut and basically, the referee stopped what he was doing and didn't come in at that moment because he saw that he was throwing back. But this was, it was just to sort of like get back in the ring. He'd been out for 13 months. He won every single round, but obviously he's got a multi-fight agreement with the Saudis. The idea here is I won, and we're going to make the better be a fight if he beats Callum Smith. Eddie Hearn, of course, was saying, well, I think Callum's going to knock him out. And honestly, if Callum Smith beats Better Biev, he'll deserve and warrant a fight against Bivol. But so that would be fine. I'm sure that they'll want to pay for it. And if it's Better Biev, that's of course the fight that everybody has looked forward to for a long time. They both had titles for a number of years. And the undisputed title in any weight class is always the biggest fight, and that would be a tremendous battle. You have the, again, if it's Better Biev, it's the absolute pure punching power, and just march forward kind of opponent that he is, compared to the very outstanding technical skills and that very outstanding jab and just everything that's on point in terms of the technical aspect of things. That's a good style matchup. So, and if it's Callum Smith, he can bring some of those things to the table, maybe not to the level of punching power or ferocity of Arthur Better Biev, but I'm down for either one of them. And I'd like to see there be, if you get to the point where you're a champion, as long as Bivol has been, was his 11th defense, and if you're the winner of Better Biev against Callum Smith, and you've got 3 of the titles, you want the biggest fight, and the Saudis will pay the biggest money. The fans want to see that fight. I say bring it on, whoever it is, whether it's Smith or Better Biev.
For sure, mate. I think everyone would definitely want to see that fight.
What about your boy Opetaia on that card? What about him?
I was just about to mention him. Oh, mate, 100%. Listen, his stock has risen and risen this year. I mean, he had obviously the statement win against Maris Bradis. And to be honest, not many people really knew. Everyone knows how good that win is, but when it comes to sort of the wider boxing audience, no one really knew how good Opetaia was. He comes to England, knocks out Jordan Thompson, and then he knocks out Ellis Zorro with a ferocious one-punch knockout. As I say, I'm very, very excited. He's one of my favourite fighters at the moment. I'm sure you're very, very impressed with that performance too.
He's a real joy to watch. Look, I knew about him for a long time because he had a big amateur career. He was an Olympian as a very young guy, and it just took him a little time to get to the point where he could get to a title fight. And then he had that tremendous battle against Bradis where he won the belt and the lineal title and had the jaw injury. Unfortunately, he showed a lot of heart and balls in that fight by sucking it up and fighting through that and scoring, that kind of win with that kind of heart in a very action-packed fight. Both guys fought very well in that fight. He just happened to be the guy that come out on top by a little bit, but it was a real good win for him. And then unfortunately he was out for 13, 14 months, and then like you said, he came over to the UK and had the win over Thompson. And I was glad that they put him on this card. It's unfortunate that they took away his title for stupid reasons that just don't make any sense, no matter how you slice it. And like he said, I can't not take this fight. He's making a career high payday, and as you say, you can't go take your belt and go to the grocery store or go pay your mortgage bill or, go pay your phone bill. So he had to take this fight, and it's a spectacular knockout. I mean, Zorro was undefeated, and he didn't just win. He won in the most spectacular manner you can do in boxing, a one-punch knockout in the first round against a guy who I'm not saying I thought that Zorro was going to win, but I've seen how Zorro fight. He's a competent professional, not a bum or anything like that. Blitzed him, one giant shot and out. That's all she wrote. And so Opetaia should have a great holiday. And I'm sure that when the Saudis continue to do these types of cards, we'll see him. I would think maybe he'll even be back on the next one, perhaps even in February. That whole Tyson Fury and Usyk undercard, there's different names that have come up, but it's not done yet. So maybe he'll be back after having less than one round in the ring.
Definitely. I don't think people would argue with that. Another one I just wanted to quickly touch on. We did see Devin Haney on the DAZN broadcast today. He talked about, Ryan Garcia looking potentially next for him. Excited for that matchup. Riding high. Haney obviously riding high after the Prograis victory.
Listen, I mean, if you take a look at the guys who are in that weight class, the big names, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a fight. They're both on DAZN. I had an interview with Oscar De La Hoya, who is Ryan's promoter, a couple of days ago, and wrote about it on my Substack newsletter at Fight Freaks Unite. And Oscar was talking about how he and Eddie had spoken on the phone and both had said they're interested. Their fighters are interested in the fight. Devin said it on the broadcast, reiterating what he had said on his social media. Ryan Garcia has said it numerous times. Ryan, when he says it, he tries to pursue those fights. That's how he basically willed the Tank Davis fight into happening. So I have no doubt that the promoters and the two fighters are all on board to try to make it happen. Obviously, you have to come up with what's the proper business deal to make so it makes sense for everybody in terms of the finances. But I think that fight's going to be next because it's a big pay-per-view fight. And the other big names for Devin to fight and for Ryan, like, for example, Top Rank and Oscar, Bob Arum and Oscar talked about trying to do a Teofimo Lopez fight for Ryan that would have perhaps been as soon as February. And for whatever reason, Teofimo Lopez said some crazy stuff about how he was only offered $1.5 million, which I don't know who offered that to him. Oscar was like, I didn't offer that to him. And I know that it wasn't Top Rank because, his own team says his minimum in his contract is bigger than $1.5 million. So bottom line is he's going to fight Jermaine Ortiz in February. So the Ryan Garcia fight is off the table. Haney and Haney's father, Bill, who's done a great job training him and managing him and all that, they were calling out Tank Davis, who has just not shown any real interest in the match. So, okay, that's fine. So what's the next biggest fight? If you're not fighting Tank and you're not fighting Teofimo, I mean, Ryan Garcia is as bigger than some of those fights. So, I mean, I think that from a commercial standpoint, as much as I would love to see the Lopez fight, Haney against Ryan is a bigger fight commercially. Yeah. Tank, of course, is the bigger one than both of them. But so that's the reason. I mean, they're both in this business to make legacy and make money, and that's a fight that can help legacy and help money. So make money. So I see no reason why that won't happen. I do believe that we'll see not Tank, but Ryan Garcia challenging him for his title, WBC 140-pound title, probably in the first, I guess maybe 4 months of next year. I think it's, I won't say it's definite, but it feels like as big fights go, relatively speaking, this will be a relatively easy one to make.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely, for sure, and it's definitely one I'm excited for. And just as I do close this off, I did actually want to mention this to you. Obviously, being from that side of the pond, we did have the unfortunate news yesterday of Larry Merchant in critical condition after sort of an accident. So I did want to bring it up, and obviously, as you sort of echoed me, we do sort of send condolences to Larry there, and hopefully a speedy recovery.
So here's the thing, just to nip it in the bud, I know what the TMZ report said. It was overblown. Yes, Larry is in the hospital. Yes, Larry, and I don't know what day you're going to post this. He's going to probably be there for another day or two. During the Bivol fight, matter of fact, it was like as Bivol was knocking down his opponent in Lyndon Arthur, I got a phone call from Larry's son-in-law because I've known his son-in-law for many years, and he knows how close Larry and I are. And I sent Larry, when I read the DMZ report, because I just talked to Larry like 2 weeks ago, I had sent him a text saying, listen, Larry, I don't know what's going on. I hope you're okay. If you're able to text, or if you have your phone, please just text me back, you're doing okay, or whatever. I didn't hear back from him. I had texted him, yesterday about that, which was, I guess, on Friday. And so while I'm watching the Bivol fight, his son-in-law called me, and I talked to him through like the 11th and 12th round of the Bivol fight. And he was saying, look, yes, Larry's in the hospital. No, he was not in critical condition. No, he wasn't in a coma. No, he just, and he went, I'm not going to divulge Larry's personal medical information,
of course.
But he had an issue. He's in the hospital. And from what his son-in-law was saying, he's doing okay. And, I joked with his son-in-law who was there with him. I didn't speak to Larry, but he was sitting with him in the hospital. I said, you tell Larry when he's feeling up to it, give me a call and I'll fill him in on all the results of what happened on this card with Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua, because I know he was interested in what was happening. So I was very, very, very relieved to hear that the news report was true that he was hospitalized, but the severity of the reason why was vastly overblown. And he actually was telling me that when the medical people came to take him in the ambulance, and he was like, fighting them off, like he was able, was loose and able to do his thing. He was fine to go to the hospital. He didn't need to be like cared for like he's dying. You know what I mean? So listen, if Larry Merchant, like I know Larry Merchant for almost 25 years, whatever happens to my man, he ain't going down without a fight. He was, even in the hospital, he's a little, I think, kind of annoyed with the attention, to be quite honest with you. But I was very, very, very relieved that he's doing okay. And I would think hopefully in the next couple of days he'll be out of the hospital.
Absolutely. It's definitely positive news for sure. And as we do approach the Christmas season, it's festive season, people are going to have time at home to spend, and they shouldn't have their time home should be spent reading your newsletter, listening to your podcast. So if you do want to give it a plug, feel free. And where can we find you, mate?
Yeah, you'd go on your internet and your internet browser and go to danrafael.substack.com. It's the Fight Freaks Unite newsletter. And as I said to you, and I appreciate the plug, it's plenty of free material, but I have a lot of people that also want the little extra, or a lot of extra actually, and get all the stuff behind the paywall for a nominal fee. Helps me, and it's, you know what, that's how I'm making my living, and it's been a labor of love, but it's been a great experience working on it, and I appreciate it, and I'm glad that you check it out, and I hope everybody else gives our podcast a listen at the Big Fight Weekend, and also checks out the newsletter.
Absolutely. The links,
which is, by the way, where they found out all the details about the deal that was made between Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder that my man Eddie Hearn denied.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, I just wanted to say it's been really, really good to catch up with you this year. I'm sure we'll be catching up sort of at the start of 2024 as we look forward to boxing. But as I said, many, many numerous topics. It's been a good year for boxing. So I always appreciate taking the time to speak to me. And let's catch up in 2024, mate. Have a good Christmas and a happy New Year, mate.
You too. Thank you, Lewis. And I say that to everybody that watches Boxing Social.
Top man. Thank you, mate. Cheers, mate. Perfect.
We need to think of a new advert for freebets.com.
Get your best betting offers from freebets.com.
Yeah, that'll do.
The following deals are now live.